Hello, next level dealers. Welcome to our Geared Up with Netgear overview training. I'll be your MC for today, Mark Garagini. We're excited to have you here for the next hour to review the complete CI lineup of Netgear. I have Fred Raby here, who heads up the product training and business development for Netgear. And Fred will be providing an overview on the Netgear product lineup. That's their switches, access points, and what to use depending on which application. We'll go over all of that. He's also going to go over some of the value adds from Netgear, like their 24/7 support line, as well as their system design services, which is super impressive. But before we get started, a few housekeeping items I want to go over with you guys. Throughout this training, you'll see a QR code that shows up. If you want to take a quick snapshot of that and get yourselves registered if you're not already for the advanced training, which will be on Thursday at 10 o'clock. So take a quick screenshot of that, get yourself registered for the Netgear Advanced Training. Secondly, you will find at the very top Q&A section. If you want to ask some questions, we could get those answered throughout the training or maybe at the end. And if you do that, you will be registered for our access point giveaway, which we will be doing at the end of the advanced training on Thursday. So ask a question, get yourself entered into the raffle for our advanced training, and you will be given away an access point at the end of that training. So without further ado, Fred, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to go over the complete lineup with Netgear, and something that I was very impressed with right out of the gate. We've been selling you guys now for about 6 months is just the complete offering. I mean, this isn't just your, I know you guys have your mesh solutions for some of the smaller homes, but you have a complete lineup of products for luxury homes, for commercial. Very impressive stuff that you guys have. And I just wanted to thank you for joining us to go over some of these products.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Mark's already given away the most important parts, our design services. We'll be talking about those in a little more detail. But just so that everybody knows, your next level rep has a way of setting up a one-on-one training. So, definitely hit up the advanced session on Thursday so that you can actually see the interface and how to configure these devices. But just know that I'm happy to take time for a one-on-one session as well with you and your team, and we'll actually help you configure an actual deployment as well. So if you're looking to use these on a deployment and would like assistance setting that up, then just reach out to your next level rep and they'll make sure that happens. Without any further ado, we'll get sharing here. And to make sure I don't distract from the slides, I'll go ahead and turn the camera off. And we'll talk about Netgear and what we are doing for the residential market. So the first area that we're going to be looking at is Wi-Fi. That's because Wi-Fi, especially in these higher end residential deployments, really challenges the Wi-Fi just as much as any major commercial development might, just in terms of the number of devices that we're seeing enter onto the network and how much faster speeds are getting. If you just compare internet speeds, across the board with the average that you saw just a few years ago, things are growing at a very quick pace, and Netgear wants to make sure that we are there helping you meet that challenge. So with that, we want to take a quick look at Wi-Fi. And of course, over the years, it has changed a little bit. And the most recent iteration that we've seen is Wi-Fi 6 and Wi-Fi 6E. And just to make sure that you are enabled for that conversation with your customers, I just wanted to take a quick minute and talk about the differences between the two. So of course, we've seen over time the 2.4 gig radio has been used very prevalently, And with every new generation of Wi-Fi, we see a speed increase there, and the same thing with the 5 gig radio band. However, if you'll notice with 6E, they didn't go to Wi-Fi 7, and that's partially because nothing changed with the underlying speeds on the 2.4 gig and the 5 gig network, but they did add the 6 gig radio. So for any customers of yours who are asking about Wi-Fi 6E and if it's what they should be looking for, have a conversation about devices that we know have 6 gig radios. Some of the more common examples would be things like a newer Samsung Galaxy phone, I think with their S22s and above, they've included the 6 gig radio. And as well with any Apple devices, that's what we've seen so far has been the bigger push for 6 gig. Those Apple devices will include any iPads and MacBooks that are 2023 models. And then, of course, on from there, they'll include the 6 gig radio. But with the iPhone, it won't be until the next iPhone, which is iPhone 15. So if they are not using that 6 gig radio or don't plan on anytime soon, there won't be any difference in the underlying performance between the 6 and 6E access points on the 2.4 gig and the 5 gig radio. But I think everybody should be aware that Wi-Fi 7 is around the corner. So once we have announcements to make for that, we'll make sure that Next Level is getting all of the information they need to keep all of you up to date. And so be aware that change is out there. But yeah, for right now, if you've got customers that are not worried about the 6 gig radio, but they still want the fastest and greatest Wi-Fi, there's never a problem with selling them a more expensive access point, but just be aware that they will not see any differences in speed between the Wi-Fi 6E and the Wi-Fi 6 access points without those 6 gig devices. Now, in looking at the access points that we have available, these are models that have been made exclusive to our Pro AV market. So these are not access points that we advertise on e-commerce partners and are also restricted through our standard distribution channels. So Next Level is a great place to pick these up. And you'll see that there is an outdoor model, our WAX608Y, and then we have 3 indoor models, our WAX618, which is kind of our I want to call it the baby bear, mama bear, papa bear approach, but this doesn't really feel like a baby bear access point. It's still a fantastic access point and does a very good job. But we do have kind of that small, medium, large approach. So our 618 comes in as the entry level there. The 628 is the option that's going to provide you the best combination of value and performance. And the 638E is going to be your high performance Wi-Fi 6E access point. A few specs that I do want to point out while we are here and handy on the slide. All of these access points support a 2.5 gig multi-gig interface. And for those of you with questions on that, we're going to be answering those in the next slide. But just be aware that that's there. Also with the 638E and 628, you'll notice a second interface showing 1 gig Ethernet. These do have 2 ports on them. The point of the multi-gig is to make sure that you can get higher performance out of a single connection. But if you would like, you can also connect these with 2 gigabit cables and do link aggregation to increase performance and throughput. With that in mind, we'll talk a little bit more about cable types in just a minute. But for anybody building a new construction home today, I would recommend running at least Cat 6A or Cat 7 cabling, primarily because that will support 10 gig once we see 10 gig out to the access points. And so even if you don't need it today, it will ensure better future proofing for those high-end homes. Also, all of these access points are designed to be powered by PoE. You'll see that you'll want to use PoE Plus for all of them. And then the 638E, it does say 27.6 watts here. And whenever you see a spec sheet about PoE Plus, it says it does generate 30 watts, but that is at the port on the switch. And we do see some power loss through the cable. So this 638E, to fully power it at that 27.6 watts, does require PoE++. So just be aware for this one, you'll want PoE++ and ideally MultiGig to make sure that you can get the most out of the performance there. If you don't use PoE++, it will still work and it'll still function. It just turns down the 5 gig radio because that is the biggest power draw. That's also where you see a lot of the performance coming through. So if you are looking at PoE+, I would say you're better off with the 628 than the 638E. Also, there are some market differentiators between these access points and the access points that we typically sell through our standard commercial channels. And the biggest changes are that these SKUs all include 4 years of our Insight Pro cloud management platform. And we will be taking a brief look at that today and a more in-depth look on Thursday. Sorry there, my daughter is looking for something and would like my help. Okay, gotta go. Sorry about that. So 4 years of our Insight Pro cloud management solution. Compare that to our standard commercial offerings. Those come with 1 year of that licensing included, and then you would need to renew that licensing after that point. But with these access points, the intention is that you can put them out for 4 years without any worries about ongoing costs. And then at the end of those 4 years is a good time to revisit getting an upgrade, especially with the rapid pace that we've seen in speeds and feeds lately. And the ease of upgradability through Insight will make future upgrades a lot easier. So with that in mind, we're going to move along here and talk about MultiGig. MultiGig is simply a way of being able to transmit higher rates of bandwidth between a switch and an access point or any other device on the network. To achieve multi-gig speeds, you do need a multi-gig device, like our access points, on one end of the cable, and a switch that is capable of multi-gig on the other end. And if you're looking at the table here, Cat5e will be able to generate 2.5 gig worth of traffic across that port type. So especially for any remodels that you're doing or people who are refreshing their equipment, multi-gig can be an excellent way of still getting some extra use out of that cabling. Also, you'll see that Cat6 does expand on the speeds that it offers, but of course it is backwards compatible. So any Cat5e or above will support 2.5 gig over the cable. In looking at switches that are going to provide that multi-gig for you, that should be the next part of the equation, shouldn't it? So I present to you our MS510TXUP. This is the switch that I recommend for any Wi-Fi deployment, and that is because it's giving you everything that you could want in that Wi-Fi switch all in one place. So it is a smart switch. So for any of you who are subdividing your network into multiple VLANs, this will support the VLANs that you need, and it'll also have some automatic QoS. So it'll be prioritizing voice and video packets like this meeting to make sure that they have anybody who's working from home will have a nice, smooth experience getting out to the internet. And all 8 copper ports are multi-gig capable. You'll see here that they all go from 1 gig and 2.5 gig, and then 4 of them will actually also go up to 10 gig. So for those homes where you would be deploying this kind of a switch without needing 8 access points plugged into it, you would have some other high-speed ports left over for other devices. That may include a network storage device like a NAS. It may also be high-speed devices such as a media server, or if you have just customers that would like a higher speed access to their computer to the rest of the network. And you'll also notice that it comes with 2 10 gig fiber ports as well. So if you are uplinking to the rest of the network, you can make sure that you are not bottlenecking the wireless access points that are attached to it. It also provides PoE++ across all 8 copper ports, and the Ultra 60 denotes that it will handle up to 60 watts per port with an overall budget of $295. So this will power 8 of our 638Es, and as power requirements increase on future levels of access points, we will see this rise to the occasion as well. So this will handle far more than the 638Es that are out now. This is also a rack mountable switch, so it'll fit very nicely in any racks that you're installing for your customer. And something I did forget to mention up here as well, because it is also a smart cloud switch, it will also work on that same Insight platform that we'll be looking at here momentarily. And that will allow you to configure those VLANs and other switch protocols from anywhere, and also make it much, much easier to segregate your wireless networks as well. Now, I don't have a slide about this yet because we only made the announcement this last week at InfoComm, but in August, we will have a brand new router as well. And I like showing off this switch while talking about the router because they share a lot in common. That router will feature a 2.5 gig multi-gig WAN port, as well as 4 other multi-gig LAN ports, a 10 gig fiber port, and a 10 gig copper port that you can also allocate as a WAN port so that you will be 10 gig ready for your high-end customer networks. This will be a rack mountable router as well and compatible on Insight. So once we have that available, that should be hitting shelves in late August, so coming up here pretty soon. And if anybody does have any questions, please make sure you're putting them into the Q&A section. If I see them come up in the course of the presentation, I'll try to answer them in line as much as I can. And if not, we will make sure that we are answering any of them at the end of the presentation.
Hey, Fred, real quick, you mentioned Cat 5 infrastructure. Is there any negative correlation between using a Cat 5 infrastructure and the upgraded Wi-Fi 6E access points? I guess, would Cat 6 be ideal for implementing your higher end access points?
So I'm going to split some hairs on that question, just because there is Cat 5 and there is Cat 5e. Cat 5 is only capable of up to 100 megabit. So anybody with Cat 5 is just going to have a disappointing Wi-Fi experience no matter what you do. There has not been a technology developed to increase the speed through Cat 5 that I'm aware of, but Cat 5e will still transmit gigabit speeds, and with a multi-gig switch and multi-gig access point from Netgear, will transmit at 2.5 gig. So if you're Cat 5e, you are all set and ready to go. If your customer has Cat 5, let's have a conversation about pulling that cable, which I know everybody loves pulling cable and getting the labor for it. So, all right. So Netgear Insight has been alluded to a little bit throughout the presentation. This is a cloud solution that allows you to manage all of your customers through a single pane of glass. And it also, because it is our solution for cloud management, it means that it is controlling our devices to a very high level and degree. This will make it easier to perform maintenance while on the road and automate some of those processes as well, things like firmware updates. And it also allows you to be able to spend less time on site for any networking issues. And if you do need to go on site, it will allow you to be able to go with more information so that you are able to, you're not having to go on site and guess. And I'm just getting logged in on the other screen here so that I can just show you briefly what that looks like. Again, on Thursday's training, we will be going into more depth to cover a little bit more about this solution. But this is what you would see when you log into Insight Pro. It does show organizations here which list out the different customers that you have. And so you can create a different customer organization for each different customer. And some of the features that I want to make sure everybody is aware of, when you go into that organization, you can also have multiple locations. So if you have a customer with multiple residences that you're covering, then it's very easy to isolate each and every one of those. And you can also set up organization-wide SSIDs. So if you know that you're going to be doing that, or just as a best practice, you can set these up for every customer. And then if you ever do have multiple locations, then their access points will automatically pick up the policy that you've created. So we will be looking at that more in depth on Thursday, but that is a feature that is very new to Insight and something that I think adds a lot of value when you only have to set up a customer once, and then all you have to do is plug in those access points moving forward. This is also great for any of you who might also have some commercial work that you do on the side, especially with any restaurants or bars or customers with multiple locations. Again, you only have to set up those policy changes once, and then any new location that you bring online, all you have to do is create the location in Insight and then add those access points. And Insight Pro is the level of cloud platform that I would recommend for any of you on the call today. You will see that if you create an Insight account, there is a choice between Insight Premium and Insight Pro, and Insight Pro is the one that will allow you to have multiple logins. It also allows you to buy the licensing through Next Level, and that licensing can be scheduled out as opposed to just automatically renewing via credit card. But the 4 years of Insight you get with the CI channel exclusive access points will load to either Premium or Pro. So if I talk about the feature sets of Pro and that doesn't seem like they are too important for you, if you're a one-man show and you're not worried if anybody else can log in, so be it. I would still recommend Pro because of some of the features like organization-wide SSIDs. Those can be very handy and helpful. But again, we will be taking a closer look at this on Thursday.
Hey, Fred, before we move on, we have a question from Manny. I don't know if you want to take a look at that. Is there an equivalent switch to the MS510 TXUP with more ports than 8?
We do have some that will be coming down the pipe. Last week at Infocom, we also announced a new switching line called our M4350 series, and that line will feature more multi-gig ports with more PoE counts. I'm trying to remember if any of those models will be launching, because we will have some of the models arriving as early as the end of July for the 4350 series. But we will make sure as the timelines come a little bit closer to any releases on those kinds of products, we'll let you know. Typically, we do see the 8-port multi-gig switches historically have been the better sellers. And a lot of that is because access points are the predominant device type that we see with multi-gig. And so if you're looking at getting a switch for a home, those 4350s are a fully managed switch. And so they do come in at a little higher cost point than the smart switches. And so for something that gives you both that multi-gig and that PoE++, you could see it just be a little less budget friendly on the 4350 than the smart switch. And so unless there is an advantage in tying that into your AV network, which very well could be an advantage there, then I would stick to the MS510 TXUP. We do also have a few other models available that provide. There is one other switch that'll give you both PoE+ and multi-gig, called our MS108 EUP. The reason that we don't show that one off quite as much is it is a plus switch, which means it does not integrate into the Insight platform, which means it's a device that you'll need to manage separately. But it is a great alternative if you have somebody who wants that higher level of performance, but maybe doesn't have the budget for the MS510 TXUP. And then there is also another switch that is in Next Level's catalog, our MS510 TXPP. That one does cap out at PoE+, though, so it would be a great alternative to the MS510 TXUP for those deployments where you're using a WAX 618 or 628, but it would not fully power up the 638Es. So, and Mark and Nick, just as a quick heads up, for some reason it is not showing me the Q&A kind of ready at a glance. So
yeah, I'll read them off to you as they come in.
Perfect. I'll make sure I'm giving some pauses there to allow that.
No problem.
So, in carrying right along here, so we did allude to some design services a little bit earlier in the call, and we do want to make sure that you've got a full introduction to this team. We have, this is brand new to Netgear. This is what we call our Pro Wi-Fi design team. And this is an email alias that goes directly to our engineering resources that specialize in Wi-Fi. So you'll see that email address is prowifidesign@netgear.com. And again, this will reach out directly to engineering resources. And the intention here is to make sure that you can get direct answers to questions that you might have on Wi-Fi deployments. This is something that is a free service, so you'll never see an invoice come in the mail. And if you need to, we can set up follow-up calls or meetings where we can have a longer form conversation about what's happening. So don't think that they're available exclusively by email, but do count on that being the initial point of contact. The other thing that they specialize in, and what we hope you're taking advantage of the most, is their ability to do heat mapping for you in remote site surveys. We use a piece of software called Ekahau, which is one of the top names in that industry, and it is very expensive to license. So we don't see a lot of companies that would like to avail themselves of its services able to buy it. So let us help you out. If you send in floor plans or blueprints, then they will be able to heat map that for you. But you will need to include information on things like ceiling height and wall materials. They overlay that directly with what those are. So please make sure as well that those are squared up. I've seen examples of somebody taking a picture from above, and if it's not squared, then it makes it very difficult to make sure that those lines are accurate, and especially that the scale for the measurements are following through appropriately. But we can say with some assurance that when we have that information accurately put in and we have a good floor plan, they are 100% accurate. We've done some testing where we've gone on site with somebody connected up to our engineer that has the project pulled up live in Ekahau. And as long as they had all of the right wall materials and ceiling heights entered in, then they were able to see 100% accurate information on signal loss and coverage area. And so that everybody knows, they factor in the spacing of access points based on the ideal roaming, which is when the 5 gig radios get to about -75 dB. That's the optimal point for a wireless network to shift over. So we do have some people that will stretch them out just a little bit more if they need to get a little bit more coverage, and there are maybe some wiring constraints or other possibilities. But as long as you are not going too much further, you should still be okay. But again, those are the ideal signal distances for that roaming to occur. Okay.
Hey, Fred, just to go back, had a question from Chris here. To go back regarding the access points, would Netgear be offering any outdoor access points with the throughput of the Wi-Fi 6 products? Kind of a two-part question. And then will you guys be offering a bridging kit with decent throughput?
And so I did not talk as much about the outdoor access point as I should have, so I apologize for that there. The WAX608Y, so it is Wi-Fi 6. It was an earlier Wi-Fi 6 device, so you'll see the throughput is not quite as strong as some of the other devices, but we typically see for an outdoor environment that usually doesn't hamper things too much. And this access point, so we have 2 different teams that have done some testing, and a team in India in an outdoor area that was free of other of any obstacles. So in free open air, they were able to go up to 600 feet and still get 100 megabit of connectivity out of the access point. And then we have somebody in Minnesota that did some cold winter testing, and in that test scenario, I don't have the speeds, but they said that 400 feet was the maximum functional range for them, and maximum functional range meant that they were able to work when they were working from home in the winter months. He was able to stick his laptop out in the ice hut and do some ice fishing out on a little pond that he's got near his house. So 400 feet was the ideal maximum distance for being able to carry out those kinds of calls. Let's see. We do plan on. Let's see. Our wireless product line manager did mention he would like to refresh an outdoor access point with Wi-Fi 7. I don't have an exact timeline on that, and of course, product development can always vary from what the plans and goals are. So if we do release any new outdoor access points, we will make sure that Next Level is getting all of that information. And the 608Y can be used as a wireless bridge as well. In fact, there are two ways that we are there are two different ways of doing that, and one way is getting a little bit of testing right now just to see what the limitations are and what the maximums are. But and I'm glad that this came up as well, Mark, because I did forget to mention that these access points will all wirelessly mesh with each other. So if you have, I hear from a lot of integrators, they prefer hardwiring these devices. But if you are in a scenario where you need to cover a dead spot or you need to get somewhere that you can't get a cable, you can, with the indoor access points, you can plug them into a wall adapter and then wirelessly link them to the next nearest wired access point into the system. And any of the Insight access points will do this with each other as long as they are Wi-Fi 6 enabled. So anything that shows an AX or WAX6 on the model, that does include access points outside of the CI exclusives. So if you have existing deployments that may be on Insight today that are not using what we've kind of started calling our 8 series, you can still mix and match these with other Insight access points. And if you ever have questions on the licensing side, please feel free to reach out, because I am happy to take the time to make sure that we are answering any and all questions, and especially when it revolves around something that you're doing live and it's something right in front of you. Those do make for a very easy scenario to make sure we're getting you the right information, and especially making sure that it coincides with how you want them to be deployed. Let's see. So the two different bridge modes that I mentioned, especially for the outdoor access point. So you can use this as a point-to-point wireless repeater, or sorry, that's the wrong way to say it. A point-to-point wireless bridge, meaning that it is only broadcasting between those two units, and it is not an SSID that can be joined by, or that devices can connect to. But that will provide the most powerful point-to-point solution, and then you come out of that access point into a switch, and then you can carry on that signal however you need to, in either putting out another access point or just connecting up wired devices. And I say that's the most powerful solution because it allocates all of the radio strength to the conversation between the two WAX 608Ys. Now, just as a point of order, these cannot be powered by anything other than a PoE cable. They only have that single port, and that's all that you've got in there. That's to make them a little bit more weatherproof. These are IP55 rated, so basically it'll withstand anything except squirting it directly with water or dunking it under the water. But even if you have it under an eave or an overhang, we've seen these survive some pretty good storms. So, hurricane season can get a little crazy because that can be the equivalent of squirting these with a hose. But if that's ever a worry, then, when you're getting out of Dodge for hurricane season, throw something over the top of this, or just plan on replacing it if it gets damaged by the hurricane. But the second mode of being able to repeat signal through these 608Ys is actually using them in that mesh mode. Now, I just told you that this cannot be powered by a power adapter. So for that mesh mode to occur, you would either need to use a PoE power injector. Just as a word of caution, Netgear does not make any PoE injectors. We typically just recommend using a PoE switch because there's not much sense in using an injector and a switch because that gives you multiple points of failure that just simply don't need to be. But if you have this powered up, even with just a power injector, you can still use it in the wireless mesh mode, which means any overlap with other signal from anything from an indoor access point or an outdoor access point, as long as it has some overlap, it will connect up to that other access point and then carry on that signal again, making it basically a commercial grade wireless repeater like you would see in a store at, say, Best Buy, with the exception that this is now creating one single SSID with the other access points that allows for roaming. And that's something that we don't see with your standard everyday wireless repeaters. So does it look like we answered all of that one, Mark?
Yes, and then some.
Okay. All right. So
we go up to the design services, I think is where we were at. I guess one of the questions, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but what is the process emailing the design services, and then how long does it usually take to get a response back? I know there's probably some other variables involved, like they're going to be asking questions back and forth, but do you usually get something back within like a decent amount of time, 24, 48 hours?
Mm-hmm. Yes, if you're emailing the design team with everything they need to be able to carry out that remote site survey, you should reasonably be able to expect that returned report within about 24 to 48 hours. I think is a very reasonable time. If things are a little more caught up, it is possible that you may see it that same day. And if you are in a bit of a time crunch, just make sure you're indicating that. And I know that they will do their best to prioritize, those times where you might be a little short on time. But just make sure, and Next Level does have a copy of this, so they'll be able to make copies of these slides and make sure this information is available. But please make sure that you are including the ceiling heights and wall materials, when you send the email, and points of measurement for scale. As long as they're getting that with the attachment, that should be everything that they need, as well as any areas that may or may not need coverage. If you have a customer with a garage that fits, 18 cars, and they don't care about having Wi-Fi throughout the entirety of the garage, you can call that out so that you're not, putting more access points in the garage than you are the rest of the house. Also, if there are outdoor pool areas, outdoor areas are difficult to properly account for in remote site surveys because things like trees and other dense items can really make plotting those in Ekahau pretty difficult. But you can at least give an indication of, hey, what should coverage look like over an area, and they will do their best to give you an idea of what that outdoor area coverage would look like. So any further questions before we move on to the AV switches?
We're good.
Perfect. So let's talk about AV over IP. That's the other part that we are here to talk about. So typically what we see in a residential network is, you're responsible for the entirety of the network, which involves the data networking, all of the Wi-Fi and switching that we've talked about previously. And you may also be deploying an audio-video distribution system throughout the home. And if you're doing that over a switch, then you will need a switch that is engineered for AV over IP. For anybody who has attempted this without a switch that has been made to do so, it can be very difficult. AV over IP products require a lot of protocols that are only found in a fully managed switch, which means if you're using an unmanaged or a smart switch or a plus switch, you may not have all of the protocols that you need for a successful deployment, and that can be very, very difficult. Netgear found that out, very early on with AV over IP deployments, and because of how complicated those networks are and how little attention a lot of networking companies pay this particular industry, we decided to be the company that was both large enough to matter but small enough to care. And we have designed a series of switches specifically for AV over IP that we simply call the M4250 series. And I'm kind of hovering on this slide for just a minute because it showcases one of the design elements that we specifically put in for this switch, and that is the ability to rack mount the switch without any cabling coming out of the front. So especially if you have racks that are very visible in a customer's home, you can make sure that you're getting that nice clean interface and something that looks just as nice and clean and as expensive as the other expensive components that are going into that rack. So you can see here on some of these pictures, and we've got another one that should show that off a little bit better, that you have rack mounts on both ends of the switch that you can mount. You'll also see here on the front, you have an M10 threaded hole that does allow for various clamps and other ways of securing these switches. And a lot of them also have VESA mounts on the underside of the switch so that you can hide these behind displays. But the real kind of secret sauce that has helped these to be so successful for both residential and commercial deployments has been our introduction of an AV GUI. This is a user interface structured around AV over IP. This is also something that we'll be spending a lot more time in on the Thursday training. So that's another definite plug for why you would want to attend on Thursday again and endure a little bit more of my voice. We'll be going into much more detail about how to set up and configure these switches. And the thing I always say is if you're not a networking expert today, spend an hour with me and you'll at least be able to play one on TV. The goal is to make sure that anybody can log in and set up these switches very easily and very quickly. There's no reason that just because these require a complicated network configuration that anybody shouldn't be able to get these set up, because it's not a different configuration every time. It's, if you're using Dante audio products, or if you're using any kind of video encoders and decoders, it's the same setup every time. So why would we make you do that every time? Instead, we just created profiles around a lot of different types. Some of them you'll see are actually manufacturer specific, like for Sonos. Some of them are more protocol based, like for Dante. And the nice part is we'll be able to help guide you with what profile you should use for a given AV over IP product. We have an AV design team. We'll be talking a little bit more about that at the end of the presentation, but I highly recommend that you take full advantage of that team as well. We've also released a software called Engage that will help you configure these switches much, much easier. So we do have the AV GUI that will let you configure these, and the Engage software will actually help you access these switches without having to know the IP address every time. We'll also be showcasing this software on Thursday and showing how it helps you, make configuring these switches even easier. So a closer look at these switches will show you exactly what you're seeing on the front and the back. You'll notice any of these ports that have two lights is going to indicate that that is a PoE port. You have one light for connectivity and activity and another light for PoE power. And you'll see that on the other side of the switch, that is also replicated in the indicator lights. So even when you can't see the back of the switch and what's plugged in, you will be able to see what is getting connectivity and power. Also, all of our AV switches have fiber uplinks. We'll talk a little bit more about the counts on those in just a minute. But on some of the 8-port and 24-port models, you'll also see two non-PoE ports, just so that you've got some extra ports that we found are very handy for uplinking to control systems. Also, we'll be going into a little bit more detail on Thursday, but you'll see 2 extra ports on the other end here as well. One of them is called a console port, which will help you get into the command line interface if that's how you want to configure the switch. And the other one is labeled as OOB, which stands for out of band management. This is a port that you can always plug into and get into the GUI. Engage will also recognize that port as well. So if you're using the Engage software, you can plug into the out-of-band port. And the nice part is with AV configurations, we see a lot of different VLANs used. And so it makes it very easy to make sure that you can configure any of those ports to any VLAN and not lock yourself out of the GUI. And hopefully we will not be showcasing that on Thursday's call, because that'll mean I've made a mistake. But we will make sure that you know how to work around that. You'll also see that in the box, we're giving you 2 sets of rack ears. One set sits flush to accommodate everything going nice and flush with the rack. You'll also see a second set that's a little bit longer, and it recesses the switch back 2 inches. And that is to allow for racks that may require you to cable down the front, but also have doors that close and don't give you a lot of space. The extra space on the switch means that a cable can come down, wrap around, and plug into the switch, and you'll still be able to close those rack doors nice and flat. So this is not something you have to pay extra for. They just come in the box. Now, to look at the switches, just so that everybody's aware, these are built around gigabit endpoints. So some of you may be familiar with some of the AV over IP solutions out there that require a 10 gig port. If that is the case, then our design team will make the appropriate recommendation for some other lines of switches that we have with 10 gig connectivity, and actually up to 100 gig up connectivity. So even if you have a larger commercial product, just be aware we have done projects with over 1,000 endpoints, and we will happily go larger than that if we need to. And the engineers will work with you from start to finish on that project to make sure that port count will be feasible. And if we can't do it, we will be pretty upfront about making sure that we don't take you down a path that we can't finish the journey. But for those 1 gig devices, we've got plenty of switches. And you'll see that we also have some of these have 1 gig uplinks as well. So with 1 port devices and 1 port uplinks, that means that these switches are ideal for audio deployments that are either single or multi-switch. That's because audio does not take up very much bandwidth. So it's easy to get a lot of audio through, you can get a lot of 1 gig devices that are using audio through a 1 gig uplink. Now, if you're doing video, though, these switches are only ideal for single switch video deployments. That is because without a larger uplink, a 1 gig encoder and decoder is likely going to need that entirety of that 1 gig pipe. And so if I have an 8-port switch with 8 encoders that need to go to another switch with a bunch of decoders, I would need at least 8 gigs worth of uplink. And you'll see that in terms of port count, you'll see 8 ports of PoE+, 24 ports of PoE+, and 40 ports of PoE+. I always like to highlight the 40 because that is a little uncommon in the switching industry. A lot of times we like to go right to 48 ports, but we ran out of space with everything we needed to put on one end of that switch, so we stopped at 40. But for those switches that have 10 gig uplinks, that math actually helps make sense, because if you have 40 ports that all need to go to another switch, then it's a nice round 40 gig worth of uplink that you need. So you'll see the same port counts in all of these switches, and all of the 8-port PoE Plus switches will give you 2 fiber uplinks. The 24-port switches will give you 4 fiber uplinks, and the 40-port switches will give you 8 fiber uplinks. This makes it very easy to uplink to multiple switches and gives you a lot of flexibility in deployments.
So they're all stackable then? You're able to use multiple switches for pretty much any application, or some of them are?
So you can uplink these in a wide variety of ways, and I'm going to use the term uplink instead of stack.
So stacking? Okay.
Yeah, just because within the Netgear world, when we talk about stacking, we talk about redundancy and single IP management of the entire stack, and these switches are not capable of that. although we haven't had that be a hindrance to the commercial application of these switches or the residential application of these switches. So you can uplink these, in a lot of ways, and that's the nice part about the design team. They will help you. In fact, we'll be showing an example of a deployment that they helped with, where not only do they tell you what switches, but they will also help you determine how many uplinks between the switches you'll need and where to put that fiber. So it is an excellent question, Mark, and they'll be there to help you with all of that. Also, the 4250s will do a minimum of PoE plus on all of the ports, but we also have some models that will do Ultra 90 PoE plus plus, so they will go up to 90 watts per port. So for those high power environments, these will work fine as well. And for anybody who's been following along with the access points, the 638E that requires PoE plus plus, you can use the PoE plus plus from the M4250s to fully power the WAX 638E. And because that switch or that access point also has 2 ports on there, these are not multi-gig. Again, these are 1 gig, but you could run 2 cables from a PoE plus plus M4250 to the WAX 638E and use link aggregation to give you those 2 1 gig ports together to give a 2 gig pipeline. So really quickly here, just to make sure we've still got time for Q&A at the end, we also have a desktop form factor of the M4250. These are very handy for when you need a smaller switch and you don't want something that's full rack width. These do have mounts that allow you to very easily attach them to the underside of a desk or a shelf. And they also have VESA mounts so that they're very easy to hide behind displays. They're available in 2 flavors. Both of them are 8 ports of PoE plus, and one of them gives you 2 10 gig fiber uplinks. The other one gives you 1 copper and 1 fiber 1 gig uplinks. Also, so we've got a slide here that also shows the full breadth of the entirety of the catalog for the M4250s. And Next Level is happy to help you source any of these. Again, I wouldn't worry about exactly what model comes with what, because our design services team will help you figure out which switch is going to be most ideal. But for anybody who would like this table, we'll be able to make sure we get that provided to you. Also, there is some technology that's going into these switches that does make them a little bit special from any other switch that you might be using in AV over IP applications. And first and foremost is IGMP+. This is something engineered by Netgear to overcome some issues with multicast. This is a very common feature needed in switching deployments. And without IGMP+, you get a network that floods all of the IGMP requests to a single switch in the network. And again, this is something that deeply affects multi-switch deployments. But we found a way to configure that multicast so that when we are using IGMP+, we can uplink between multiple switches, and we don't have to worry about that network flooding. So in a nutshell, we just make it easier. We also automatically trunk VLANs between switches. So if you have multiple profiles needed to accommodate for audio and video, they will automatically tag those uplinks between 2 Netgear M4250s or M4300s. Also, if you need more than one connection, like we alluded to earlier in the case of a 40-port switch needing all 40 ports of traffic, when you plug in multiple ports between M4250s and M4300s, they will automatically put those ports into a link aggregation group and make sure that that doesn't create any routing loops. You can still manually configure all of these things, and you can turn that feature off if you would prefer. And this is something that we'll talk a little bit more about in Thursday's training as well. The M4250s also allow you to control the fan speeds, including a completely silent mode where those fans are off. So if you do have noise requirements that you need to adhere to, please reach out to the design team. those noise requirements do require you adhering to particular levels of ambient temperature and staying under a particular power draw. There is a complete table on the data sheet for the M4250, but we want to make sure you're utilizing that design team and ensuring that that you've got everything accounted for, and that design team will make sure that those fans are not going to come on. We also work with a wide variety of companies. This is a short list of the manufacturers that we are partnered with today. This slide is actually out of date, but I can't update it anymore because, as you can see, I'm running out of space. We do have a complete list on our website at netgear.com. If you browse over to the commercial video section and commercial AV section and look for a link that says View Our Partners, you will be able to see a full list. And that list encompasses companies that we are able to publicly advertise a partnership, which means our engineers and their engineers have come to a consensus about how their traffic is best transported over our switches. Right now, that list is somewhere around 200 to 220 companies, and there's about another 200 to 250 that we are currently working with to figure out the best way to transport their products. So even if you don't see a company that you are using on our partner list, please still reach out to the design team, and if we are currently working with them, they'll be able to make sure we are giving you correct information. Just like our Pro Wi-Fi design team, the Pro AV design team is available by email at proavdesign@netgear.com. That is to allow for faster responses and making sure that there are more people watching that inbox. It is covered 24 hours a day because we have engineers in the United States. We also have engineers in Europe and engineers in Asia that are looking over this inbox. So please reach out to them for assistance in designing an AV network. They will make sure they're getting you a complete bill of materials, including fiber transceivers on what to connect and where. And you can actually see in this diagram here, they are showcasing how many connections between the switches to accommodate the number of streams that need to go from one switch to the next. So they can help with any size of deployment, including smaller deployments. Just because you might be looking at a single residence and you might only need an 8-port switch, please still reach out to the design team. We have a very prominent example of a company a couple of years ago that had worked with us several times on network designs, and so we felt confident about the designs that they were using. They came to us for a project and said, "Here, we need these switches." We said, "Do you feel comfortable about the design?" They said, "Yes, we do." It turns out they were using a different encoder and decoder than they had used before. So anytime you have something new or different happening, always please reach out to the design team. This particular project, it meant that the fiber transceivers that they were using were wrong for what they needed to use for encoders and decoders. And that meant that they had 5 weeks of delay until they reached out to us and said, "Hey, why aren't these working?" And they got a response in 20 minutes, guys. So for lack of a 20-minute response to an email, they had 5 weeks of delay. Now, that's not to say that every email will get responded to within 20 minutes. We'll do our best every time, but we do try to guarantee a 24-hour turnaround time to emails sent to the Pro AV design team. And they do help out with troubleshooting as well. So any AV problems that you're running into, please reach out to these guys. They will be the right people, and they will help you cut through that mess very, very quickly. So I can't emphasize enough. Reach out to proavdesign@netgear.com for the AV side of your network. Reach out to Pro Wi-Fi Design for the Wi-Fi side of your network. And let your next level rep know that you would like a one-on-one session with Fred to help you set everything up, and we will help you set up the configuration that you would like to pursue. Well, Mark, I think that...
Yeah, no,
Yep.
Thanks a lot, Fred. A lot of good information here. Thanks for going over the complete lineup. I think that Pro AV design team is amazing for anybody for system design and for troubleshooting. Definitely utilize that if you guys haven't. Write that email down for any of your upcoming projects. And we'll throw up that QR code again if you guys want to go ahead and take a quick snapshot of that, get registered for our Thursday session at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. We will get more in the weeds with configuration, get into the switches so you guys know all the ins and outs. Hopefully this was useful for you guys. It was an hour to go over the full lineup. A lot of cool, exciting things to come with more products being released by Netgear. And please reach out to your next level sales rep for any of your networking needs. We have all of the access points in stock, switches. So anything you guys need, please reach out to us. Fred, really appreciate your time, buddy. And we will talk to you again on Thursday.
Yep. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Oh, by the way, guys, this webinar is going to be recorded. I saw that a bunch of people came in a little after 10 o'clock. So we will have this on our website. We'll have it on our YouTube page that we can share with you if you want another review. If you missed the beginning portion of this training, we'll have this available for you guys here in the next coming days. So again, appreciate everybody joining, and we will see you soon.